Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this special Globe 100 event. Also, welcome to everyone here, not just in person, but everyone who is joining us via the live stream. Hello, at globeandmail.com. I'm Judith Pereira. I'm the arts editor here at the Globe and Mail, and I'm pleased to be your host tonight. The first Globe 100 was published in 1998 by Jack Kirchhoff and Martin Levin. And I'm so glad that this year we have not only this event to celebrate the Globe 100, it's our first, but an interactive database that collected all 28 years in one spot, which you can search by author, title, or year. And it's a great tool, so 2,800 books. It was a massive, massive lift for Globe Books, so thank you to everyone who did work on that. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the original storytellers who occupied these territories, and it is where we are currently situated. They are the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. We thank them for sharing their stories with us and their knowledge. Now, we've got a wonderful program for you this evening, celebrating what we call the art of the story. We're going to have conversations with some of the most exciting voices in Canadian literature today. Margaret Atwood, who has a memoir out this year, and Michael Crummey, who is just fantastic. I love his work. I love Margaret's work too. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Michael just recently won the Dublin Literary Prize for The Adversary, and if you haven't read it yet, you really should, and there's books back there that you should buy. We also have Globe journalist and debut author Eric Andrew G., who published Mind Mappers, and Ian Brown here, who is not just a nonfiction author, but also a feature writer at the Globe. So please be sure to stick around after the show, or where we'll have a closing reception where you can talk with other authors from the Globe, as well as buy books and meet us. And Eric and Michael will be available for book signings. I'd like to also give a special thanks to our sponsor for the event, Penguin Random House Canada. Now, as I mentioned, this event is to celebrate the Globe 100, which we just published this past weekend in the Globe. And it's the 28th year, and we start with a crazy process where we have this spreadsheet that we begin in January, or I begin in January, and people sort of give me their thoughts throughout the year. And then in October, I realize, oh my God, we have the Globe 100. And we have this mad scramble, and people like Ian, Barry, Josh, all the team at the Arts, several authors who you know of, or writers like Patrick White and Joe Friesen, they all gather together and we whittle it down and we debate and we discuss and we debate some more, and some people get quite heated and then have to leave the room and then they come back in. And then we come up with a list, and I go away again, and by sometime in the middle of November, somehow we get these 100 books. And one of the big things that we've always done with the Globe 100 is we're committed to Canadian publishing. We're the Globe and Mail, and we understand the importance of Canadian publishing, the importance of Canadian books, both fiction and nonfiction. And we feature those in the Globe 100, one of the few places left, I think, in the world that do these types of things, that really commit to Canadian publishing. Thank you. When I started as books editor in 2019, I knew I wanted a database because there was so much wonderful stuff in the Globe 100. And I had known Martin and Jack when I first started at the Globe as a summer staffer. And I knew the work they put in, and I knew just what was in there. And there was just so much great Canadian stuff, and that was one of the first things I said, how can we build this database? And we kept trying, and then we had, COVID and lots of other things, but now we have this amazing tool, and we'll just keep adding to it. And it's, I hope, something that all of you get a chance to use. It serves as a historical record, an archive of significant Canadian literary works, and it's crucial to our country, to our publishing, that we have a record. So we in the arts section have been writing about some of the challenges facing culture through the year, but publishing has had unique pressures. So that's why I'm really happy that we're having this event and celebrating Canadian books, Canadian authors. So thank you for coming. I'd like to now open up our first conversation featuring two award-winning Canadian journalists, both of whom are part of our Globe family. Ian Brown is a feature writer. He's also authored 4 nonfiction books, has won British Columbia's National Award for Canadian Nonfiction, as well as the Charles Taylor Prize. And Eric Andrew G. is also an award-winning journalist and the Globe's Quebec correspondent. He writes about politics and culture in the province, and his work often looks at how history shapes current events. This year, he released The Mind Mappers. Now, it's one of the best nonfiction books I've read so far this year. I still have a bunch of others that are still on my side table, but I should add that the Globe 100 is read by somebody at the Globe. I may not read all 100 books, but someone has read the book. But I just love what Eric did with that book, and it's such an important part of our history, and something that I knew very little about, so it's quite amazing. It's become a national bestseller, and it's a finalist for the 2025 Quebec Writers Federation Literary Award, the Mavis Gallant Prize for Nonfiction, and the Concordia University First Book Award. So, before I would like to welcome both Ian and Eric to the stage.
I was going around the back. Hello, hello, hello. Good evening. Hi. Hello.
Hello, Ian.
How are you?
I'm fine.
Oh, good. Before we talk any further about how writers, nonfiction writers, choose what to write about, and before Atwood and Crummey take the stage, don't you think nonfiction is much, much harder to write than fiction? I mean, this took you 5 years, didn't it? 4 years to write?
I have to decide how much to take the bait here. Yeah, I mean, I think there are novels that have taken 5 years to write, too, my understanding. But, yeah, I mean, it's sort of impossible to answer, except to say I do think nonfiction books are getting harder to write for a whole bunch of reasons, one of them being that we are living in a sea of information that all online, that all nonfiction books now have to justify themselves against and compete with. I mean, the internet is basically a lot of bad nonfiction. And, and some quite good nonfiction. Wikipedia is
Donald Trump
magic.
writes a lot of fiction. I mean, there's a lot of, yeah.
I'm on the news side of I have to be careful what I say, but yeah. Yeah, so I think, it just means that to make a nonfiction book worthwhile, worth people's time, it has to be, you have to work the clay a little more. You got to add more than just information in there. And so I think the bar keeps getting higher and higher for nonfiction. At the same time, it's the infrastructure that has historically kind of made it possible, that has propped up nonfiction writers, basically the journalistic infrastructure, the newspapers and magazines that publish long features that get turned into books and that provide salaries for people while they're working on those books, it's withering, particularly in Canada. And so, we might be catching up with fiction in terms of just the sweat equity that has to go into it.
Excuse me, I want to talk to you about all of that. Before you do that, you've written this very readable, great first book, so congratulations on that, about the friendship between Wilder Penfield and his possibly closeted scientific partner.
Yes, you're very intrigued. You're very intrigued by that part.
Yeah, I am intrigued by that part, with whom he founded the world-famous Montreal Neurological Institute. So just briefly, how did you pick that subject? How did you know that was a book you wanted to write?
Well, this is actually a good way of talking about how the Globe fosters this kind of thing, because it came out of two pieces for the Globe, actually. I was working on a long feature for the Globe more than 5 years ago now, whose headline I think ended up being "How Smartphones Are Making You Stupid." And in the course of my research, I was looking at how addictive smartphones are, and the sort of bedrock of all addiction studies was this study at the McGill psychology department in the 1950s. They implanted an electrode into the brain of a rat, and it became addicted to tapping the lever that triggered the electrode. It would tap it thousands of times and collapse from exhaustion. And so the scientists realized we found the pleasure center in the brain, and they were roughly right. I mean, it's and this. Was happening in Montreal in the 1950s, still being talked about today, and this, around the world. I thought, I'll file that away as something to write about one day. And when I moved to Montreal to be the Globe's Quebec correspondent, I realized that it was part of this much more complex and richer and darker story about these two men, Wilder Penfield and William Cohn, who had founded this Brain Institute, which became the most important in the world for many decades. Penfield is celebrated and has a street named after him. People might remember that Heritage Minute on TV, "Doctor, doctor, I smell burnt toast." And that's my way in at dinner parties for explaining what the hell I'm writing about. But Cohn, I mean, there's nothing. Cohn was forgotten, and that bothered me. So I think we've talked about this, but obsession often drives these things, right? And I became a bit obsessed with Cohn because it felt like this injustice, and my journalistic instinct kicked in too, and that it was an untold story, and that bothers us, right? So I wrote a long tribute to Cohn in the Globe. I think the first draft was like 20,000 words, which is I knew it was never going to get published. But in any case, it was lengthy and detailed, and it was probably the most detailed treatment of Cohn's life and legacy that had been published, and got a good reaction. And I worked with my agent Martha Webb, who I think is still here, who I only met through Robin Doolittle, a colleague at the Globe. So again, the Globe's making this all possible. And meanwhile, I'm getting paid a salary to conduct what would eventually be book research, and so it grew out of that. And it was all possible because of like one of 500 journalism jobs in the country that I happen to hold. So yeah, it was a product of both my obsession and this sort of remnant of the kind of journalistic tent poles still holding the nonfiction world up.
So just before we go on to talk about those more general problems with nonfiction that you were talking about, one of the things you reveal in the book is that Cohn, who was the lesser partner, I guess, of the partnership,
was
probably sorry.
No, I
well, certainly in terms of fame, he was the lesser.
Yeah.
That he was probably closeted, and that he was probably in love with Penfield.
Mm-hmm. That's a
hint
spoiler,
at this,
but
you hint at this 50 times in the book. You say it's probably true, but you never say it's actually true. Why didn't you say it was actually true, A, and B, was that difficult material to deal with?
Yeah. Well, we can't know for sure. There's nothing in the written record. There's no sort of confession. People didn't write these things down. It was illegal to be homosexual at the time in Canada, and
It was very dangerous to be and certainly in Montreal alone, it was difficult.
it was
Dangerous to be a
illegal, and Cohn also knew from his, working in the fields of neurosurgery and adjacent to the field of psychiatry that worse things than jail could happen to you for being gay. That lobotomies were a common treatment for homosexuality, quote unquote treatment. And so there were good reasons for discretion. I mean, overwhelming reasons for discretion. So we just don't know. I promise not to reveal the identity of the person who told me this, but someone well placed to know said that it was fairly well known within the institute that he had an affair with a male orderly at the institute who he was well known to have had a very close friendship with. And so I include that information because that I can source and is it was relevant to the story because the relationship between these two men is the story. It was difficult to deal with though because you know, it's for one thing, it's shadowy, as you know, as is becoming clear. Right, we're not entirely sure, and it's tricky when you're talking about you know, outing someone, even if they are, you know, died a long time ago. I think his family may have had trouble with it, even though the book is a story of his hero's journey, really, and a tribute to him, a loving tribute to him. So yeah, it was probably the trickiest part tonally and in terms of deciding what to include and not in the book.
Trickier than understanding how the brain works, which you explained very clearly.
Well, I mean, that was hard to wrap my head around, but you know, once it was there, it was there. I mean, there's still things I don't know about the subject of Cohn's sexuality. I mean, there's a lot I don't know about how the brain works, but at least what I do know, it's there in black and white, and it's easy to go and check again, and I can fact check it, and it's all concrete. So it's a different kind of difficulty, but yeah.
Yeah. Let's get back to this business of how difficult it is to write great nonfiction now. You know, I sometimes look around and I say, well, where are the Peter Newmans or the Christina McCall Newmans or the, you know, Sandy Rosses? All these names are falling on dead ground here because I'm too old. But I often, you know, or the Pierre Burtons, I mean, where are they? And I think there are on the Globe 100 list. There are a couple of really great contenders. But I do hear from my publisher friends and contacts that fewer and fewer people are actually reading nonfiction, certainly nonfiction books. Why do you think that is? What do you think is it that the writing isn't as good? Is it the subject, there's too much stuff covered on the internet?
Yeah, that may be part of it. I think there's, in Canada, we have a problem of, you know, declining interest in our own stories. I mean, there's this kind of, you know, creeping cultural colonialism from the South that, you know, you're talking about writers from the golden age of Canadian cultural nationalism when Canada was awakening.
I thought we were on the edge of another one right now.
Well, we may be. So, you know, I mean, this is the thing. I think those, you know, Newmans and Burtons are out there. I've read a lot of Canadian nonfiction in the last couple of years as my book has come out, and I've been on the sort of author circuit and picking up other people's books. And it's amazing the stuff that's in. Greg Mercer, whose book is The Lobster Trap, is also on the Globe 100, another Globe journalist. Just an astounding book, and you know, as good as anything you'd find in the U.S. market, for example, no question. You know, I'm sure Greg's book is doing great, but it's true that these books, you know, mine include, that they don't become the sort of sensations, the kind of events that a Pierre Burton or a Peter Newman book became. And I think, you know, I think, as you say, we may be entering a moment when Canadians are recognizing again that we're interesting, and that our own stories, our own history, our own voices are worth cultivating by reading them and by thinking about them by getting excited about what's going on in our own backyard.
All right, I want to propose an alternate theory here. Excuse me for doing this. The thing that makes me go back to reading the great nonfiction and I reread it every year, that makes me reread Ian Frazier or Tom Wolfe or Joan Didion, excuse me, or John Valent or Rachel Aviv or A.J. Liebling. I mean, they're all there. Is voice.
Mm-hmm.
That very distinctive authorial voice, that contextual voice that tells you you're reading the story, and the story is about other people, but you know that somebody really interesting is looking into this and is your surrogate.
Yeah, you're right
there. Why is voice? I could be displaying a bias here. I apologize for the exhibitionism, but why is voice so much rarer now, or at least harder to find? It seems to me that it's harder to find.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think there's a couple of things. We talked about this the other day. I think that, the online discourse can probably have a flattening effect in a way on the way people present themselves in public. Anxiety about, putting your head above the parapet because of all the, potential negative feedback you're going to get. Although that doesn't really happen to books. I mean, they don't enter the thresher of the social media discourse in the same way. So, I think there's something that's happened to the conventions of literary nonfiction. People started calling it long form. That word that I sort of hate that describes basically magazine pieces.
You like creative nonfiction more?
No, I don't like any of the.
It just sounds like a bunch of
the
lies.
names are terrible, including nonfiction. Right? It's a non-name. It's just a negation of. It's saying what it isn't. But they and this goes even for the best magazines in the world, like the New Yorker. The pieces have gotten a bit formulaic. There's just a. In the era you're talking about, the new journalism and into the 70s and 80s, there was something new and vital about writing nonfiction with voice, with novelistic techniques. And I think that it's just entered a period which happens to fiction, happens to art forms sort of cyclically. It's just sort of gotten stuck in a rut where the conventions, you sort of open with a scene, and then there's what we call them at the Globe a nut graph. It sort of says what this is all about, and then it cuts back in time right to the beginning of the story, and then you go through chronologically to the end. And it's newspaper writing, elevated newspaper writing, which shouldn't be a knock. There's great newspaper writing published all the time, including the Globe. But that sort of that voiciness is gets lost within these formulas, within these constraints. That I agree. I was reading the Black Lamb, Gray Falcon, Black Lamb, Gray Falcon by Rebecca Wester, kind of travelogue of Yugoslavia. No one would write. Every second sentence sounds insane, and every second sentence is completely brilliant. And she's just taking big swings with every sentence. And it's true that no one writes like that anymore. There's a caution and a kind of overly professional dryness now. People have it's sort of become professionalized. People have.
I think it might be actually the technology. We live in this time when there are so many more avenues of self-expression, but ironically, it has had, as George Orwell, predicted, it has had the effect of narrowing the range of expression. You either get people on one side or the other. People are intolerant. It's harder to take, to be Tom Wolfe writing Radical Chic or writing those weird stories with the leads that had the word hernia 37 times. You would start. You couldn't do that anymore, I think, because the technology has trained us to be closed-minded to it.
Yeah.
Does that sound like old man shouting at cloud?
Well, a little bit, Ian. Yeah. No. I mean, there's something there. I mean, look, I'm reading. I'm kind of a young fogey. I'm reading Rebecca West right now. I'm at bedside table, but it's worth not being too gloomy about the state of nonfiction. I think, so Greg Mercer's book, right? It's a study of the lobster fishery, and mostly in Canada's East Coast and in New England too. And it's very timely. It's a huge industry. It's a journalistic book that's looking at potential overfishing, and there's urgent issues at play. But it's also basically 300 pages. It could have been prompted by the phrase "consider the lobster." It's basically a 300-word riff on the lobster, and it's very ambitious. I told Greg this. I wasn't so sure that subject could support a book. But then again, one of my favorite books of all time is by John McPhee. It's just called Oranges.
Yeah, me too.
It's 200 pages on oranges, and it couldn't be better. It couldn't be more readable. And there's no story. It's basically a list of facts about oranges.
Yeah.
And I mean, Greg's book isn't that, but it's a worthy successor to Oranges. It's like Oranges, but about lobster. And it's not it's not flattened out and writing scared, and there's all kinds of really great nonfiction being published in Canada that's in all kinds of form. I mean, there's Peter Kutenbrauer's new book about maple syrup. Again, it's just a book about maple syrup. There's no story, but it's great. Yeah. It's great. He just goes deep. I mean, he's an arborist, not an arborist, but he's a tree scientist and as well as a journalist, and he goes into the science of how sap gets made, and as well as the history, and he studies it from every possible angle. And there's voice, and there's anecdote, and there's science, and it's totally ambitious and formally kind of unconstrained. I don't think we need to despair. I think people need to be reading these books. Yeah. I mean, they are kind of out there.
Let me ask you one last thing before we turn it open to questions. It sounds to me like the Globe and Mail could be the kind of place where you could find this great, unexpected, zippy, zesty, totally, exciting kind of writing.
That's right, Ian.
I think we should both leave now.
No, but it's true, right? I mean, we're not. I mean, we sort of are being paid to this, but I actually do mean it that the Globe is one of the last bastions for this kind of writing. You get to. I mean, you look at the Globe 100 list, and a number of the books are written by Globe writers. It's one of the safe harbors in Canadian journalism, and more than that, it demands ambition from us, the members of its staff, and that's good, right? I mean, we're generating, it's a sort of seedbed for what the best nonfiction you're going to read in the next 10 years, and we just need more Globes. I mean, there used to be more places like this that cultivated, writers like you and me, the important voices,
Yeah. Who are doing the really difficult work of nonfiction as opposed to
That's
fiction.
right.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more with you. I think it's time for questions. Is that about right? Yes. Judith, yeah?
Yes, it is. Well, we do have questions. Eric, this question is from Debbie. What do you start with, and how important are research archives to you? Do you still go into physical archives, or is everything online?
I mean, it's a great question, and I was, sometimes you look in the acknowledgments of a book and you realize the writers had to fly around to 15 different archives. I was lucky in that I had one really amazing archive that contained basically all of the papers of all of the doctors and scientists I was writing about, the Osler Library at McGill. It's one of the world's great medical history libraries, and they have everything related to the Montreal Neurological Institute. And they've actually digitized quite a lot of stuff that I used for the piece in the Globe before I was able to. It was during COVID, I couldn't travel then. But for the book, I used most of my book leave just to go into the archive. And even if they had digitized everything, I would still have gone in, and I'm so glad I did. When you hold, paper that these your characters held 70 or 80 years ago, and you see their handwriting and where the pen slips, and you can you can see the thumbprints, and you feel that they're in the room with you. You almost feel their breath on your neck, and it brings them to life in a way that is kind of irreplaceable. So it actually wasn't where I started. I couldn't just I couldn't start. But it was almost where I finished. It was kind of, and it's still this almost kind of sacred place for me. I go back there. I've been for book events and to thank the librarians and stuff, and it still feels like it's full of these kind of ghosts who come out of the pages. It's incredibly exciting. It's also, it can be very tedious, right? I mean, there's this probably the greatest nonfiction author ever, Robert Caro, has got this famous and endlessly quoted line, "You turn every page." And I did try to bear it in mind when you're in the archives, because a lot of an archive, anyone's archive, I think maybe particularly a doctor's, is a lot of minutia. It's a lot of schedules and memos but there's always that possibility that the next one is gonna crack the whole case open, and there's nothing like that feeling when you hit the mother lode. I mean, it is a bit like Panic for Gold, right? I mean, it's mostly you're squatting in the creek, with pebbles, and but when you get one of those nuggets, it's that much more thrilling, and you don't get that any other way than by being there, I think.
And this goes to both of you. Sort of, when you talk about place, how important is place in your novel? And is place sort of, or in your books, is place something that is sort of going away, or is situating it?
I think place is more important as more and more life is lived, electronically, through a phone, through a screen. To actually go to a place, to physically be there, to feel it, and not to even think about it. Never mind having ideas about it, but to feel what. I mean, to your point, to go into the archives, to fall slightly in love with the librarian who helps you, to
Speak for
feel,
yourself.
No, I'm serious. I'm not kidding. My wife is in the audience. Honey, nothing serious. You know what I'm talking. But all that physical connection is critical, because it makes you sort yourself out geographically in relation to the subject. I don't know how people write books without, what we called shoe leather reporting.
Yeah.
I mean, you go, you see what they look like, you see what they smell like, you see what's going on in the background, what you can hear, what kind of music they're playing. Without that, you've only got what they say or what they wrote. You don't have scenes, you don't have detail, you don't have dialogue, and you don't have point of view, really. And without those things, you don't have a story.
Yeah, I had to see brain surgery, obviously, for my book, and to know that during surgery the brain pulsates because liters of blood are being pumped into the brain every time the heart beats, and so it's you're getting the sense of just how surreal and intimate it is for people like Conan Penfield to perform surgery on this delicate, sort of pulsating organ inside someone's head. And so, yeah, I mean, I could only have written this book in Montreal. It's a very Montreal book, and it's full of the smells and tastes and sounds of the city. And I just that was Montreal's like the third most important character maybe in the book, and it would have been unthinkable to research it and write it anywhere else. I had to feel the city,
Yeah. This is a question from Farah. She asks about how you handle self-doubt or criticism during the writing process. What do you do with your self-doubt? Other than call your editors, what else do you do?
Yeah, what good does that do?
Sorry.
No, nothing personal.
I'm like, wait.
No, go ahead. I want to hear this.
I'm just thinking, I mean, during the writing process is one thing, but then I don't think I've ever felt more self-doubt than when I was asked to share a bill with Michael Crummey and Margaret Atwood. It's the promotion of the book is a little more more affected by imposter syndrome than when there's something very private about writing the book. There's no one watching over your shoulder, and so you can take time to work through your anxieties, and it's all, there's also, just the journalist thing of having a deadline. My deadline was actually my wife's due date. We had twins on the way, and
Oh, no.
yeah, no. No, it was great actually. I had it was history's greatest deadline. I mean, I was really racing to finish the book, and so I didn't have that much time. I mean, I had moments of self-doubt, of course, but you just had to plow through them, right? Just like, I mean, it's a newspaper thing too. You just write. I mean, you don't, self-doubt sort of a luxury you don't have on deadline.
Well, I don't know. I mean, when you're writing a book and you're not at the Globe, you're on a leave, and you are...
Which you have been.
Which I have been for a long time. And I'm back now.
How much book leave did they give you?
What?
How much book leave did they give you?
I think I took 8 months.
What?
Well, I wasn't being paid. I mean, it was unpaid book leave.
I know, but still.
But the problem is when you're not with your editor, you start to freak out and you think, I can't do this. This is a stupid idea. And it's never going to work. And why did I ever think this is a good idea? And, I've got 70 books in the archive, boxes in the archives to go through. And then you call your editor, and your editor says, oh, let's go and have a drink. And you have too much to drink, and then you can't work for 3 days. And then you're even more frantic than you were before. So calling the editor is, it's very reassuring, but it's not reassuring. But I think the real issue is this, and I've come to this late in life, this realization. I think writers write because they like freaking out. They like it. They like to get right up on the edge of the precipice, and they're looking over and they're going, Jesus, it's a long way down, and I'm going to look like such an ass when they realize I've taken my pants off or whatever it is I've done on the page. And they like that because it makes you feel alive. It's a true engagement with the subject. I think that's whatever you undertake as it's certainly in nonfiction. I'm sure this is true in fiction. We'll find out. But in nonfiction, whatever you undertake, there is a psychological reason. I'm looking at Kirk Macon right now, who wrote one of the greatest
Let's all look at Kirk Macon.
crime books. No, seriously, he wrote one of the best crime books ever written in Canada. I don't know why and it was, about a guy who'd been wrongly accused. I don't know why you took that on, but I'll bet you've had reason to think about, the reason for that. There's always a psychological undercurrent, and it's finding that psychological undercurrent that is at least half the pleasure of writing these non-selling books. Sorry to carry on like that.
Here's a question from Lisa. Eric, you've explained sort of how you heard about Dr. Penfield. Did you know about the Heritage Minute? Like, did you know before?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So
I watched TV in the 90s. Yeah.
All right. And then did you have a sense when you were writing this book that you were going to, that this was important to Canadian identity? And did you ever think about, I'm going to put this is sort of a key moment that Canadians need to know more about? Like, did you ever think about what you were giving to Canadian nonfiction? Yeah,
no, I didn't think about it in those terms because it's at once a very Canadian story, but also very international. I mean, the Institute was the world's greatest center for brain research for, let's say, at least 20 years, and was very international in its makeup. I mean, for one thing, Cohn and Penfield were American by birth, and only Penfield became a Canadian citizen, even though they both lived most of their careers in Montreal. But they trained neurosurgeons from around the world when the specialty was in its infancy. So they trained the first 10 Indian neurosurgeons. They trained the first Chinese neurosurgeon, the first African-American neurosurgeon, the first Arab neurosurgeon. They all trained under Conan Penfield. And, researchers came from the Soviet Union when the Iron Curtain was down. I mean, it was a very international place with huge global implications. Not only do they teach half the world to practice neurosurgery, but Penfield's thing, the burnt toast thing, was that he was mapping the brain. In the course of trying to treat epilepsy, he passed an electrode over the surface of a patient's brain while they were awake on the operating table, and he learned in the course of doing this where memory is stored, where the brain's reward center is, where speech and other higher human faculties are derived in the brain. And it's not just Canadians who are interested in this. So I am proud that this happened in Canada. I think it's important for Canadians to know about it because it happened in our backyard. But it wasn't this. It wasn't a patriotic impulse necessarily that drove me to write the book. It was just a damn good story, and I just had to do it for myself as much as anything. I think that as we sort of alluded to, I think that writers do have to be kind of selfish at the end of the day in what they undertake. You have to be obsessed. You can't be writing a book as a project or as a good work or for someone else. It really has to be something that just sort of comes out of your gut that you just have to do.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time. That wraps this part of the session up. Thank you, both Ian and Eric.
Thank you, Eric.
Thanks, Ian.
Well, thank you very much. And now for our next conversation with Margaret Atwood and Michael Crummey. I first met Margaret in 2019 when I became books editor. And one of the first things she asked me was, what are you going to do to promote Canadian books and Canadian publishing? And how do we do that? And I said to her, I'd like to do a book club. I think that would be a great way for us to get people, our readers, involved. And she said, sure, what can I do? And so she did that first book club with Barbara Gowdy, and it was just a fantastic experience. And we got a ton of people who came here for the event, but unfortunately the pandemic intervened, and so we put it on pause. This year, the Globe 100 archive, we did a lot of work on that, and I knew that I wanted to do something special for it. And so I once again contacted Margaret, and she said, what can I do? And I said, I'd like to have an event. Now, you guys know Margaret as this amazing Booker Prize-winning, Giller Prize-winning, amazing author, Alias Grace, the Mad Adam trilogy, which is my personal favorite. But she's also a real friend of Canadian publishing and Canadian authors. And so I'm really, really glad that she's able to come here today to help us promote the Globe 100 and this database. Both Margaret and Michael have been on this list several times through the years. As I just mentioned, Alias Grace, the Mad Adam trilogy, the Testaments, and of course this year, the memoir. Last year, The Adversary, The Innocents, Sweetland. So both of them have been on the list several years, and I'm delighted to have them on stage with me. Welcome, Michael and Margaret. Here's yours. Would you like me to pour some water for you? Or do you have it over there? Okay. Well, Thank you again for coming tonight, but I'm just going to start off this first question, and then they're really going to take it away from there, because you don't really need to hear from me. You want to hear them talk. So I'm just going to start off with Canadian publishing, why it matters, Canadian authors, Canadian books, and then I'm just going to let you guys go on, and I'm just going to sit quietly here and listen to what you have to say.
Well, I'd be happy to jump into that, but I do feel like the nonfiction clowns over here
Yeah, go ahead, talk about the nonfiction clowns.
threw the gauntlet down at the start. And I have a personal stake in this because my wife Holly is here, and she's a nonfiction writer. And so I would like to hear from somebody who's done both about which is harder.
Go ahead,
And
Margaret.
think about that
Yeah,
very
sure.
carefully before you answer.
I don't think it is. It's not on. Is it on?
Yeah.
It's on. Okay. Well, I think that entirely depends on the book you're writing. You know, so sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. If it doesn't work, you throw it out.
That's a good answer. There you go, Ian.
Yeah. So it's easier when it's working, and it's harder when it's not working.
Do you have a sense of which one doesn't work most?
I have no sense of that, and I think it would entirely depend on the individual writer.
Right.
Because some people's, whatever they do, it doesn't work.
She was looking at me very
I
intently.
was
when she
not
said
looking
that.
at you. I was not looking at you, and I will take this opportunity to say that I think The Adversary is terrific.
Thank you so much.
This dark, sinister Jacobean drama. And has anybody actually identified why it's called The Adversary?
I have. But I feel like I might be alone in that.
You're not alone.
No, okay, all right.
So let me guess. I think it's called The Adversary for two reasons. Number one, there's this conflict between two people, each of whom is the other's adversary. But in addition to that, the adversary was the name for the devil in the Bible and Christian history in general. Am I right?
Yes, you are absolutely right. 5 points for Margaret. It's interesting. People have asked me why it's not called The Adversaries,
Well, that's why.
and that's why.
Yeah, there's only one of him.
Yes, and also I feel like I know you're here to listen to her, but I also felt
Well, we like listening to you, too.
for each
I'm going to
character
ask
in
you
the
about
book.
that in a minute.
For each character in the book, it does feel like, and I think for all of us, there's something we want more than anything else that we would be in danger of betraying
Losing
ourselves
our
for.
souls.
Yeah, and so for everybody in the book, their adversary is themselves, and
Of
they're faced with
course.
that question.
Well, it's the devil within, is
The
it
devil
not?
within. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yes, education in English literature does come in handy
Yes.
at moments like
I would
this.
agree with that. Yeah.
Well, the other thing I'd like to ask you, Michael, is rumors have been around for some years that you did a very accurate and funny imitation of me in your past. Would you like to address that?
Not really. I do remember while I was doing it, saying to my wife that I'm a dead man. This is really gonna come back.
Give
on
us
me.
some of the highlights.
Well, so Holly and I were working for Adventure Canada, who you have spent a lot of time working for.
Yes.
It's an Ontario outfit that does small ship cruises to mostly northern locations.
Very, very northern.
Very northern. And also they do a circumnavigation of Newfoundland every year.
Yeah, and that's fun.
And that's a great trip, which we did about 10 times. And the Adventure Canada people are a little bit crazy. And so they like to dress up and do crazy events. And one event was, was it Canada Day or something? It was a costume competition you
You're
had
not going
dress
to
up
get
as
out
your
of it that way.
you had to dress up as your favorite Canadian.
Yes. Well,
And they
that's right.
had this room where it was just full, it was like Mr. Dress-Up's tickle trunk on speed. And I was just digging, I had no idea what I was gonna do. And I was digging through and I found this curly black wig. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, that's it. And I got a blouse and a diaphanous scarf. And then people went up in turn to the microphone to explain who they were. And I went up to the microphone and they just shouted it out. I didn't say a word. It was like, Margaret Atwood! So, but for the 5 o'clock shadow, apparently, I look quite a bit like you.
Not sure about that, Michael, but what did you say?
I didn't say anything at that point because everybody guessed.
Yes,
So-
but then what did you say?
They tried to. What was your official title in the Handmaid's Tale for your cameo? You were Stern.
Oh, I didn't have an actual title, but I was one of Aunt Lydia's sidekicks.
Okay, so maybe it was
Yeah.
an alias Grace. What was
Oh, disagreeable woman.
disagreeable woman? So they tried to give me, I think it was second or third place,
Oh,
and I put on my best disagreeable woman, Margaret Atwood,
yes.
and I refused absolutely.
Well, good for you.
Second or third was not good enough. So that was it. That was the whole thing.
What are you holding back?
That was totally it. That was totally it.
Okay.
There is a
Mike-
picture.
Yeah. Oh, well,
and-
I would love to see that picture.
Yeah, I'll have
Yes.
to send that to you.
Give me the picture and I'll put it up online.
I was thinking that I might try to find somebody who knows how to do such things and do a cover of your memoir with my picture of you.
No, then you would be a dead man. But I'll lend you the pink gloves if you really want. Okay. Sorry for wasting your time with this.
Yes.
I was
Yeah.
going to try
Yes.
to direct you guys back to.
Yeah, right.
Talking
I've been wanting
books.
to know that for a long time, and now I've got a rather feeble explanation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the importance of Canadian publishing,
Oh yes, that.
particularly.
That.
Yeah.
Yes, important to whom? I guess you would say to Canadians.
To
Canadians,
To
but-
Canadians. And I guess just at this moment in time, this year where we've had so much turmoil, not just in the industry, in the publishing industry, but across the arts and culture sector.
Or just in politics in general,
Yes,
because everything influences everything else.
absolutely.
Yes, well, Canadian publishing is just part of a much larger ecosystem, and that would involve possibilities for writers. So my generation was told if you want to be a real writer, you got to leave Canada. So creating the ecosystem in which such people can exist, starting, so the writer is the sort of primary resource. Without writers, then no publishing. But then, of course, you need bookstores where you can sell these things. I won't say you need libraries. Don't you just love people to say to you, I'm waiting for your book at the library? But libraries are very important, if not to writers exactly per se, they're very important to readers. And again, without readers, no writers. So these two things are joined at the hip. It's chicken and egg. And Canadian publishing, ideally, or publishing in Canada, serves as the way of making public. That's why it's called publishing. And making available to readers stuff that writers have written. And what you say to young writers is, writing exists in the gift economy, which has quite different rules from the money economy. But then the piece of writing has to pass through the valley of the shadow of commerce until it emerges on the other side and becomes a gift again for those who take to it. So I also say, so writing is, you put the message in the bottle and you heave it into the ocean. Sometimes it just sinks. Sometimes it floats to shore. Someone comes along, picks up the bottle, opens it, and can't read the message because it's in an unknown language. Someone else comes along, opens the bottle, reads the message, but doesn't like the message, throws it back into the sea. And a third person comes along who finds the bottle, takes out the message, reads the message, and says, "This is a message for me." So that's when it turns back into the gift economy. And publishing is part of that process. Yes, it exists in the money economy, but it also exists in the gift economy because their job is to take something that is a gift and transform it into a gift on the other side of the money economy. And if you think that it's just stark commercial considerations that are behind publishing, you're quite wrong. As we all know, publishers in an ideal world publish at least some books because they love them. It's true that they have to publish other books that will help them meet the bottom line. But those books are supporting the ones that are not necessarily going to make a profit. So it's all connected. And Jack McClellan paused to offer a little prayer to Jack McClellan. He used to say there's books and there's cubes. And cubes look like books, but they're not really books. For instance, this one, he said, kicking a door stopper in his office. So he would publish, beautiful flower arrangement and knitting for amateurs and things like that he thought he could sell. Those have been impacted by the internet because you know yourself that you look up your knitting patterns largely online. So those kinds of books have kind of disappeared, but others have taken their place. Books about lobsters, no. I like lobsters. Yes.
Publishing is it's a crazy industry, and it reminds me in some ways of farming and fishing because it does seem like there's a perpetual crisis.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And I always try to remind people when they talk about things, how bad things are in publishing, of stories that I've heard from Mordecai Richler about the fact that when he started writing, there were 2 bookstores in Canada, like 2 that sold only books. That was the reason they existed.
Yeah, the rest were Coles.
And when I was reading your memoir, I was struck again by that sense of the absence around you as you were starting out. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, endlessly, dear.
That's why you're here.
Yeah, so let's take the year 1960 as a starting point. The University of Toronto Quarterly, every year in the summer, published a roundup review of every Canadian book that had been published that year, for the whole year. So as I recall, 60 or was it 61, there were 5. 5 books written by Canadians and published by Canadian publishers. That's in English Canada, but the situation was similar in Quebec. So our generation would be told, go to New York, go to London, and they would be told, go to Paris, if you want to actually be an artist or writer or anything like that. So that was in 60. All of the institutions that you see around you today came in either in the 50s or in the 60s and sometimes in the 70s. So that was nature abhors a vacuum, because there was so much of nothing. People invented it. They invented what was going to go into that nothing. So you were wondering why there wasn't this sort of swashbuckling feeling in Canadian publishing that there was then. A lot of those guys involved were vets. They'd been in World War II, and Jack had been the captain of a corvette. And that's how he ran the publishing company. So, you know, there's a torpedo. You gotta dodge it. Full speed ahead. like that. And he and Hugh Cain, who's Sean Cain's father, you might know him, they were both in McClellan and Stewart, and they used to both, because he was a vet too, they were both like that. And they ended each of their conversations with GFY, which young Sean didn't know what that meant for years, but it was completely from being vets. And Pierre Burton and Farley Moat, you know, they were all of that generation, which was, to hell with you, you know? I'm going to do what I'm doing, and if you don't like it, middle finger to you.
Right.
Yeah, so they were like that, and I think people have become more polite. You know, they've become more risk averse to a certain extent. And also, in those days, there wasn't very much to lose. So then you took risks and you invented things and you fooled around with ideas because...
Right. So in a lot of cases, people created their own publishing companies.
Yeah,
to
they
publish.
created publishing companies, they created magazines, and ultimately, not ultimately, but next we created the Writers' Union because nobody knew what a contract was. They didn't know what was supposed to be in it. They didn't have anybody to ask. The poets never expected to make any money anyway, but there were some novelists scattered across Canada who'd never met each other and really didn't know how to go about this thing. There weren't any agents as such in Canada at that time. So there was nobody you could go to and say, is this what I'm supposed to, what does this mean?
I'm old enough to remember when agents in Canada became a thing.
Yeah.
Because they weren't around when I first
No,
started.
not at all.
Yeah, and I had Stephen Heighton from Kingston,
Oh,
who was
yeah.
a friend of mine.
Yes.
And he kept telling me, he kept trying to give me the number of his agent. He said, you know, you should really call her up. And at the time, I was writing poetry and an occasional short story. And I said, Steve, 15% of nothing is nothing. Like, no agent is going to look at me. But that was what, early 90s, I think, mid 90s.
Oh, that
and that was
late?
That was just
Whoa.
when it became a thing to look for an agent before you look for
Well,
a
an
publisher.
agent in Canada. So those of us of an older generation eventually got agents, but they weren't in Canada.
No, that's right.
And you had to explain Canada to them. You know, say, well, here's what you need to know about Canada. Huh? Where's that?
You guys are just, I mean, you both started with poetry. You're both poets. Can we talk a little bit about poetry and being novelists and the two art forms and how those two speak to each other and where sort of
Well,
how
let's
that's
go back to the 60s and economies of scale. So in the 60s, it was hard to publish a novel in Canada unless you had a British or an American co-publisher because there weren't enough readers initially. And if they did become aware of your Canadian novel, they would say either, well, of course, it's just really second-rate American or British, or they would say, why aren't you in New York? You know, if you're any good, why aren't you in New York? Like that. So it was hard to publish novels in the 60s, but it was easier to publish poetry because it was shorter and cheaper. So this is in the early stages of being a poet. You could do it in your cellar, which a lot of people did, including me, except I did it in John Robert Colombo's cellar. He had a flatbed press on which I could hand set. But some people used Mimeo machines, because Stettiners, cold type had just been invented then, and they published their own books. It was also the beginning of the reading in public movement, which hadn't been there in 1950 and was there in 1960. So City Lights Bookstore in San Francisco, reading out loud. The venue here was called the Bohemian Embassy, And all of that eventually turned into the Harbourfront International Writers Festival, now the Toronto International Writers Festival, which was the first freestanding authors festival in the world. Ooh. Yeah. So poetry was what we did in the 60s because it was what we could publish. And that's always something to be considered. Having grown up in the Marshall McLuhan age, we're always thinking of what is the means of publication?
Right.
You know, what is the technology involved? And can it interface with readers or recipients or whatever it might be? So yeah, poetry.
There is a moment in your memoir, though, where you talk about, I think you were walking across a field.
Yeah, but I was 16. What did I know then?
Okay,
Nothing. Yeah.
For those of you who haven't read the memoir, you say something came to you as you were walking across that field, and when you started walking across the field, you weren't a writer, and when you finished walking across the field, you were a writer.
That's the process of writing, but not the process of publication.
But was it poetry that you had in your head? And was that...
It was, but I had been writing other things for school, of course. But in those days, we didn't write fiction or even poetry. We wrote essays, and that is all we wrote for school.
So were you always... Was it always in your head to write fiction?
No, not at all.
Once you started publishing? No.
Oh, you mean from the age of 16?
Well, or from the Circle game.
Oh,
Were
that
you
was
thinking-
much later.
Yeah.
I'd already been writing fiction and publishing short stories, and I had written, by the time the Circle game came out, I had written a happily never published novel, thank you God. Yeah, but there were big names in poetry in the 60s for that reason, because there weren't any big names in novels.
Right.
Or there were a couple, Mordecai and Margaret Lawrence, I would say, both of whom had published outside the country to begin with.
Right.
So like that. So Jack, again, full speed ahead, damn the torpedoes, put out a collection of Irving Layton and then sent Irving around to sort of yell at people to give poetry readings. And Al Purdy followed shortly after. But I would say it was Irving and Leonard Cohen who took that sort of beatnik reading aloud scene and took it public.
It's interesting, when I was reading your memoir, I mean, I grew up in a world that was completely different in terms of what was available publishing-wise, but I grew up in Newfoundland. And in some ways...
That'll do it.
Yeah, in some ways I felt like my experience was somewhat
Very similar, yeah.
Because there was no publishing world in Newfoundland. And
Not
I was
much,
finding
yeah.
all of these fantastic Canadian writers. Like I remember discovering Timothy Finley and Al Purdy and Margaret Lawrence and yourself and on and on and on. But to me, that felt like finding writers from the States or
Sure.
Europe. That gap felt just as wide to me. And I remember there was a little magazine in St. John's called Tickle Ace.
I remember that.
Yeah, and my grand ambition when I started writing, and it was all poetry. Poetry was what I started with and was all I wanted to write at first.
And why was poetry so what drew you to poetry?
Well,
and why did you?
that's what claimed me at the time. I didn't. There was no sense that I had fiction in me, that I could sit down and write stories in that way. But I wanted to write poems that made people feel the way the poems I was reading made me feel. And my grand ambition was to have something published in Tickle Ace, because that's all that seemed possible.
Sure.
That was all that was available to me,
Yeah,
really.
so that's what I wanted too. I wanted to be published in something called the Canadian Forum, now extinct, but was known to be hospitable to new writers.
Yeah.
So that was the bar. It got higher later on, but
Yeah. Well, I think the importance of the Canadian publishing industry, to get back to it, to like the ecosystem of the publishing world that allows books to move from that gift world that you and I live in most of the time through the
Valley
capitalist
of the
system.
shadow of the capitalist system.
That ecosystem and all sizes of it, like from the large multinationals right on down to the running the goat press that operates out of a tiny little shop in Torscove,
The
Newfoundland.
best children's publishing in this country is fabulous. And if you want to look at some of the best, most innovative publishers, it's in children's publishing.
Yeah.
And one of these is Running the Goat in Torres Cove. And
Yeah.
God, they're amazing.
Yeah, and having all of those things out there, and for younger people coming up to see those as things, oh, actually, that's a possibility for me, changes the writing landscape. Like in Newfoundland now, I cannot keep up with the writers coming out of Newfoundland, let alone in Canada. You know, I don't know how the Globe 100, you described the process a little bit, but it's kind of like that. There's so much of it, and so much of it is so good that it just feels like I feel really lucky to have been born after you and your cohorts did so much work
I'll trade you.
to create that world for me to grow up in, you know.
Well, we weren't doing it specifically for you.
I'm happy to take the scraps that fall off the table. That's fine. But it is kind of, it does open up so many avenues for people, just in terms of making people feel like, I grew up in a tiny mining town in central Newfoundland, born in '65. Like, there were no Newfoundland writers. Cassie Brown and Death on the
Harold
Ice.
Horwood.
And Harold Horwood, but nobody knew who he was. I had never heard of him until I became a writer. So the thought that a kid from Buckins could actually be a writer seemed like, I wrote in secret for years because it seemed like such a ridiculous ambition to have, because there was nothing around me to say that was a real possibility.
Yes, there's nothing around me either, but apparently I blurted it right out. I did not write in secret like you, possibly because nobody would have accused me of being a sissy.
Yes, I lived in an all-male res at
I would
Memorial
think,
University.
yeah.
I had to keep the poetry writing on the down low
Yeah.
in those days. It was
Well,
somewhat
I did
suspect.
that in graduate school, but only because it wasn't respectable. Yeah. So yes,
so-
what tortured childhoods we had.
How do you go from sort of that writing and scribbling and then deciding, you know what, this draft is good. This draft is something I want to put out there in the world. Where does that,
Well, there's a lot of steps in between.
tell me about them.
Well, the draft has to turn into a manuscript. And then, if you're like me, you've got some trusted people who aren't in publishing. And you let them read it. Because if they are in publishing, they'll probably let you write the phone book at, at my age. Margaret, this is terrific. So with my readers, I like to know only one thing. Did it hold your attention? Okay, then once you've done that, then you might give it to your agent, right? And she will either say, well, same problem with the phone book. Margaret, this is terrific. But then it gets into the hands of the editors at the publishing company, and they're more stringent. Yes, they're much more stringent, especially if you're writing a memoir. And there's 3 of them, one in the US, one in Canada, and one in the UK, all of whom didn't know or did know different things. So you go through all of that, and then it's something that you might, well, then you do the copy editor. The last gate out of hell is the copy editor.
Go ahead.
Was that, I'm wondering about earlier on when you were starting out. When did that
What
struggle
happened?
of like deciding this is good, this is not good, and the flip-flop where you, in the morning it's brilliant, in the afternoon it's terrible. Was that
Yeah.
part of your process?
Oh, no. Not so much, but partly. However, all of these moments of sort of excruciating self-doubt that you have been describing I didn't have a lot of those. I had some, but not to the extent of thinking, well, I'm never going to be a writer. I was the teenager who thought I was going to write True Romance magazine short fiction in order to support myself.
Right.
I got some of it. I read it. You know the kind of thing I'm talking about. The cover has a girl on the front with a tear coming out of her eye. And in the background, there's another young girl with a young man. And you know the story.
Right.
She stole my boyfriend. Yes, and that's one
You
of
got to
the
pay the
stories.
rent.
Yeah, well, that's one of the stories in True Romance magazines. The other one is Wuthering Heights Redux, in which you've got two boyfriends. One has a motorcycle, and the other works in the shoe shop. Which is the right choice?
Right. The
Yeah,
age-old
so some
question.
of them are like that.
Right.
Yes.
There was a moment in the memoir that really struck me, that and surprised me. We have spent some time together over the last
We
10 or 15
have.
years.
We have. Make of that what you will. Start a rumor. It's okay, Holly. Nothing happened.
Says her. But when you had gone through a number of rejections before you had published, and I think it was for the Circle game, you got
Yeah,
the
I
notice
got rejected first go around.
But then when you got the contract for it, you lay on the floor in your apartment and were in the depths of despair for about 24 hours.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Depression, I think, rather than despair.
Okay. Can you talk about what that was and where it came
I've
from?
got no idea what it was, but I think it was, okay, now I've committed, you know. Now I'm going to actually have to do it.
Right, and that was it?
Well, then after a while you get up off the floor and go about your business.
Right.
You
I
get
think
hungry.
It didn't.
Want
You have to pay the rent.
more craft dinner.
Right. I thought one of the lines was, "Is my little book going to change the world?" No, it's
No.
not. Was
No,
that part
it's
of it?
not. Partly, but it's really hard to explain. I think it's like, be careful what you wish for, and then you get it. And you open up the box, and you thought it was going to be this wonderful, twinkly, animated flying fairy, and it turns out to be an old shoe.
Right. Right. It's certainly, that feels like something that I've experienced, and most other writers experience at some point, that there's a sense that there's something so magical about the books that you fell in love with and that made you want to be a writer. And you expect, if you ever put books out into the world, that your experience of that will be somehow similar or will carry some of the same magic.
Okay, here's the secret. You've already read it.
Your
and
own
you're
book.
the only person who has.
Right.
So it can no longer do for you what you hope it will do for a reader. Because not only have you already read it once, you've already read it about 8 times because you've had to do all the drafts.
Yeah, and for me, I think there's also the sense that you're never going to see what your book does out in the world.
You will never see what your book does out in the world, and that's part of the upside.
Right.
It's actually part of the upside.
As I've
because-
gotten older, I've come to appreciate that
you're-
side of it
you're-
more.
It's a blind toss. It goes out into the world, and writers used to put at the ends of their book something called an envoy, in which they sent the book out into the world, and they said, "Goodbye, little book. May you make new friends," and et cetera, and so
Right.
forth. And these envoys can be quite long and complex sometimes. If you go back a couple of centuries and follow them along. But that's what it is. It's go, little book, out into the world. Here's your lunch.
Right.
Here's your train ticket. Bye-bye.
Right.
Because wherever the book is going, you are no longer in control of it.
Right. Yeah.
You cannot control what any given reader is going to think about it. You have no idea of where it may travel in the world, what countries it may turn up in, what other people are going to get out of it. Strange moments in which somebody says, "Your book changed my life." And you think, what was it like before?
That's right.
In what way did it?
Right.
Yeah,
I
I
have,
mean, with
like-
your book, you know, The Adversary, it changed my
Right.
life.
I
It
have-
made me into a serial killer.
I have yes, it is concerning. I have on a couple of occasions had someone say to me, "Your book was the best book I've ever read." And my first thought is, how many books have you read? Like, was it just that one? It must have been just that one. But that I think was the hardest adjustment for me as a writer to make, was that letting
Letting it
go,
go,
and
well.
making peace with that sense that the book has its own life out there if you're lucky,
Yeah.
but it's not part of your life.
Well, it will be part of your life in that people come back to you with reactions to it, but it's no longer part of your life in the same way that it was.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so it's like that, and that's just what it's like.
Can we ask for some predictions?
Yes, we have questions. I'm just like listening to the two of you, and I'm like, oh, this is great. But yes, I do have questions from the audience. So let me go here. Make this. This is from Jessica. This is about the ballet, the Mad Adam Ballet. Why a ballet, and how did that come about?
Well, Sir Wayne of Covent Garden proposed it before COVID, actually. And he was going to be in Toronto, and he said, "Can we meet?" So I said, "Sure." I mean, it sounds wacko to me, but...
I've seen it, and the book is so, yeah, I didn't really understand how it was going to be a ballet, so go ahead.
Yeah, so I said, "How are you going to do it?" And he said, "I don't know yet, but it won't be, you know, completely like the book." Well, it couldn't be anyway, could it? It won't be linear, he said. And I said, "What are you going to do about the big blue penises?" And he said, "We'll think of something." And that's all I knew about it before they actually did it. So he's very private. He won't let anybody in to watch rehearsals. He says it distracts the dancers. So the opening night was the first time I'd ever seen any of it.
Oh,
You know,
wow.
So a big surprise for me as well as everybody else. And you do think when you give people the permission to make other things out of your work, you think either this will be terrific, in which case it's worthwhile, or else it will be a complete flop and we'll never hear of it again. So what's the downside? You might as well let Wayne McGregor play in your sandbox, because he is brilliant.
Oh, thank you.
And they're bringing that back again, by
Yeah.
the way, in June, and
Yeah.
also to Covent Garden.
Great. Michael, this is for you from Roma. Newfoundland is such a huge part of your stories. It's such a interesting island with so many interesting idiosyncrasies. Did you intend the island to be such a character in your book? Is it an organic thing that happens?
I think it's pretty organic. I definitely, I used to be asked on a fairly regular basis if I would consider writing a novel, if I'd ever consider writing a novel not set in Newfoundland. And I don't know if Toronto writers get that question at all, but but I had to think about it because I was being asked, and so my answer was, I probably could, but why would I? Like, I've always said that Newfoundland is the best gift a writer could be given, because it is such an absolutely intrinsically interesting, unique place. And it's there are enough stories there for 100 lifetimes of a writer. And also, Newfoundland is the place that made me. So it's also the place that I'm trying to understand as a way of trying to explain myself to a certain extent. Yeah, so it's impossible for me to write those books without thinking of the place itself as a huge influence on the people in the story. You know, like it's the geography of the place, the work that was required to make a go of it in that place, all of those things had such a huge impact on who those people were and how they saw the world and how they interact with each other, that it is kind of the central character of almost everything I've written, I think, the place itself.
Okay. This is from Simon. In speaking about the adversary and its central characters who do not travel a conventional redemption arc, you've reflected on the fact that contemporary politics is also full of characters such as Donald Trump and Netanyahu, who have caused you to lose, as you've said, the ability to believe that redemption can come over anybody. I'd like to hear from both Michael and Margaret what effect that realization has on your writing, which is supposed to be an optimistic act.
Is it?
Is it? I was going to say, is writing supposed to be an optimistic act?
I think the act of writing is optimistic in that you are believing that this thing, your marks you're making on this piece of paper, can jump time and space and communicate with other people, and that communicating with other people is a desirable thing to do. So there must be something in other people that is at least worthy of your respect, shall we say. And you're also believing that whatever you're writing, you might possibly finish. And that if you finish it, it might possibly get published. And that if it gets published, it might possibly do well enough to make the publisher want to publish your next book, which is how those things go. Yeah, so apart from content, it's an inherently optimistic act, but that doesn't mean that the stuff inside it, you know, the people, the actions, the outcomes, doesn't mean that they are necessarily positive, because if they were, we wouldn't have Macbeth.
What about you, Michael?
Yeah, I think certainly, I think I've come to think of the notion of the traditional notion, which I believed inherently, of the character arc of a novel is like, you know, person goes through certain things, learns certain lessons, is a different person at the end, and generally a better person.
What have you been reading?
Dr. Seuss, mostly. But this sense that there has to be a lesson in the book.
Well, it's very Victorian.
Yes, yeah, I think so. And not true to life, to a certain extent. And so I've become less interested in forcing that on a story and allowing a story to be as dark as it needs to be, you know, as dark as the times that we're living in to a certain extent. And I also feel like, just to echo that comment, that if I had no optimism whatsoever, I wouldn't be sitting here, and I wouldn't have written that book. But I think it's not helpful to pretend that the times we're living in or that the people we're surrounded by aren't as dark as they seem to be as well.
Could you say that bit again? It's not helpful to pretend that people are better than they are or that they're worse than they are.
It's not helpful to pretend that they're better.
Oh, that's what I thought you meant.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. And just to, if I could nuance that a little bit, I think that one of the things I've always done in my books is tried to find something human in even the worst characters, and to see why they are the way they are, or something like that. And I think I'm less convinced that every person has that in them, that there is something necessarily good at the heart of all of us, or something redemptive possible. And I think that's just what the times are doing to me personally, you know. And I think The Adversary is a reflection of that to a certain extent.
Because it doesn't, well, no, we're not going to talk about the ending.
Yeah.
So would you say it more closely resembles Macbeth or Richard III?
Wow.
Or possibly the Duchess of Malfi?
Possibly the
Yeah,
Duchess of
possibly
Malfi.
that one, yes.
Yeah, yeah. And this is where I admit I haven't read Richard III.
It's made for you.
I
Yeah.
will go to it as soon as I leave this room.
Yeah, you got. Yes, you'll love Richard III. He comes on at the beginning and tells you how bad he is, and then we just watch him being bad for the rest of the
Or get the production from Stratford. It was so good. But yes, you should
Okay.
do that right after this. Well, first you have to sign some books, then later on. Actually, we're almost, we are actually out of time. It's like counting down. So I'm just, I'm going to ask one final question. Both of you travel quite a bit. Is there a country that Canada should be emulating, should be looking at with policies or Canadian publishing that really works? Is there a country that you've seen, wow, this country really works? Canada, what you should be looking at this country? Is there? Go ahead.
Okay. Well, we happen to be at a moment in history in which Canada's looking pretty good. So, comparatively speaking. So there are features of the publishing and book worlds in other countries that we could emulate. But as a place to live, to actually live in it,
Yeah, it's pretty great.
that's somewhat different. Yeah, so they have a terrific on-air live book radio show in Germany, if that's of any help.
I'll keep that in mind.
They have a lot of book publications and media broadcasts devoted to books in France. Really a surprising number. And a lot of them have been there for really quite a long time. So they're Le Devoir, Libération, things like that are still going, and they have big, big audiences. So we can look at that. You know, there's various things we could do that other countries are doing, but what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I can answer that question better than you. I did.
You were just in Ireland.
I was just in Ireland, yeah, and there's bookstores everywhere. I also have spent some time in Poland.
Yes.
And the literary culture there was phenomenal, and I think part of it is paying attention to the ecosystem. So my publisher in Poland for a long time was a young guy he was a road engineer, and decided he hated that, and he'd done some translating courses, somehow got a copy of my book Galore, went to every publisher in Poland and said, I think you should pay me to translate this. And they were like, that's not how this works. So he borrowed some money from his father, but also got some government grants and started his own publishing company. And the fact that that's possible, I think, speaks to the strength of and it's still running. They published like 6 or 7 of my books over the years. And
In Poland.
in Poland, yeah.
So different than Newfoundland, or maybe it's not.
Yeah,
Maybe,
I mean, that's a question for another time, but it's a weird thing. It's very strange. Yeah.
Huh.
But I do think that paying attention to the ecosystem here as well, and making it possible for those crazy people to start those things and keep them running is absolutely essential.
So there is another thing to add about France. They have a law that says you can't undercut the price of a book.
Oh.
So wherever they are sold for the same price. And that has allowed a lot more bookstores to remain in business. And of course, that supports publishers. It is antithetical to the, quote, spirit of capitalist competition. But that's what they do, and they have a very flourishing book culture.
Well, that brings us to the end of this. Thank you very much to Margaret and to Michael. I'm going to ask everyone to just stay in their seats while Margaret and Michael leave, and I'm just going to do some housekeeping. Thank you, all of you, for coming. You know, these nights are hard, dark, cold, but thank you for coming to hear us and to participate with us. Thank you for those of you joining us in the live stream. And the live stream will be archived on the Globe and Mail's culture pages in the next couple of days. So you will be able to take a look at it. And I wanted to just say that we're going to we have books for sale. We will have Globe writers also outside signing books. Barry Hertz, who has a new book out, and Tony Keller, who has a new book out, as well as some books that have been published previously, Sideways by Josh O'Kane, which was turned into a play, The Master Plan, if any of you guys saw it. Anyways, this is all happening, and of course, we'll be out here. Please say hello, and yes, thank you again for coming out to a very successful night. Oh, I was supposed to say one more thing. Hold on, everyone. For those of you who aren't aware, the Globe and Mail has a travel experience program. And it features Globe and Mail journalist authors. We're sold out of the Danube cruise, and there's a waiting list for it. But we do have a few more spots on the Portugal tour. If you're interested in finding out more, please pick up a postcard on your way out. I also forgot to mention that Greg Mercer is going to be here, and his Lobster Trap book really is fantastic. So Greg, Tony Keller, Josh O'Kane, and Barry Hertz.